The dusty streets of Julian, California stretched before Vivian Abbott like a judgment as she stepped down from the stagecoach. Her fine emerald traveling dress, already dulled by the journey's grit, but her spine straight as an arrow. It was the summer of 1878, and she had come west with nothing but her father's debts and her mother's pride, both of which she wore like armor against a town that had already decided what to make of her before she had even arrived. The whispers started before her boots touched the ground. She could feel eyes on her from every window, every doorway, every hitching post where men paused in their work to stare at the young woman who had inherited the old Ashford place on the hill. Her uncle had died 3 months prior, and Vivian, at 22 years of age, had been his only living relative. The townspeople of Julian had expected someone grateful, someone humble, someone who would sell the property quickly and disappear back to wherever she came from. Instead, they got Vivian, who looked at their simple town with eyes that betrayed no emotion and lips that rarely curved into the obliging smiles they expected from young women. Miss Abbott. A weathered man with a silver star pinned to his vest approached her, his hat in his hands. "I am Sheriff Coleman. Welcome to Julian. I knew your uncle." "Thank you, Sheriff." Vivian's voice was clear and educated, another mark against her in a town where rough edges were more trusted than polish. "I trust the house is accessible." "Yes, madam. Though I should warn you, it has been empty for a spell. Might need some fixing up." "I am quite capable of fixing things, Sheriff." She lifted her 2 heavy bags before he could offer to help and began walking up the hill toward the house that was now hers. Behind her, she heard the murmurs grow louder. "Too proud, too fancy. Who does she think she is?" The words followed her like shadows, but Vivian had learned long ago that pride was sometimes the only thing that kept a woman standing. Her father had drunk himself to death back in Boston, leaving her mother to die of shame and consumption. Vivian had nursed her through it all, watching their fine house stripped away piece by piece to pay for whiskey and bad investments. When the letter came about the inheritance, it had been a lifeline, and Vivian had taken it with both hands, knowing she would never let anyone make her feel small again. The house was worse than she expected. Dust coated every surface, the windows were filmed with grime, and something had made a nest in the kitchen corner. But it was solid and it was hers, and as Vivian set down her bags in what had been her uncle's study, she felt something close to hope stirring in her chest. She spent the rest of that day cleaning, scrubbing, sweeping, until her fine dress was ruined and her hands were raw. She did not care. Physical work felt honest in a way that nothing in Boston ever had, where she had spent years pretending their family still had money, still had status, still had anything worth holding onto besides false appearances. As the sun began to set, painting the California hills gold and crimson, Vivian stood on her front porch and looked down at Julian. The town was small, nestled in the hills where gold had once been discovered, though now it was mostly known for apple orchards and cattle ranching. She could see the main street, the saloon, the general store, the church with its white steeple. It looked peaceful. It looked like it could be home, if only they would let it be. The next morning, Vivian walked into town with a list of supplies she needed. The general store fell silent when she entered, conversations cutting off mid-sentence. The proprietor, a round woman with suspicious eyes, served her with minimal words and maximum judgment in every gesture. "That will be $4.30, the woman said, her tone suggesting she expected Vivian to argue or worse, not have the money. Vivian counted out the exact amount in coins and bills, meeting the woman's eyes steadily. "Thank you." She was loading her purchases into a borrowed wheelbarrow when she heard the commotion down the street. A horse was bucking wildly in front of the saloon, its rider thrown to the dust. Men scattered, shouting as the animal kicked and wheeled, eyes rolling white with terror. Vivian should have stepped back, should have stayed safe and uninvolved like everyone else who pressed themselves against storefronts. Instead, she found herself moving forward, her purchases forgotten. The horse was tangled in its own reins, that much she could see, and the panic was making it worse with every passing second. "Someone shoot it before it kills somebody," a man yelled. "No," Vivian's voice cut through the chaos. She was already walking toward the horse, her hands out, her voice dropping to a low, steady stream of sounds. Her mother had loved horses, had taught Vivian to ride before everything fell apart, and Vivian still remembered the soft words her mother had used with even the most fractious animals. "Miss, get back," someone shouted, but Vivian ignored him. The horse saw her coming and reared, hooves flashing dangerous and deadly. Vivian did not run. She kept walking, kept talking, her voice a ribbon of calm in the storm of panic. She could see the problem now, the reins twisted around the saddle horn and one front leg, creating a trap the horse had made worse in its fear. "Easy now," she murmured, close enough now that the horse could hear her properly. "Easy. No one is going to hurt you. I am going to help." The horse trembled, snorting, but something in Vivian's voice seemed to reach it. When she was close enough, she slowly reached out and touched its sweat-damp neck. The horse flinched, but did not bolt. Vivian kept one hand on the animal while the other carefully worked at the tangled reins, talking the entire time. Her world narrowed to just this frightened creature, and the knots she needed to undo. It took 5 minutes that felt like an hour, but finally, the reins came free. The horse shook its head violently, then stilled, sides heaving. Vivian stroked its neck, checking for injuries with gentle, knowledgeable hands. "There now," she said softly. "You are all right." When she finally looked up, she found the entire street staring at her in stunned silence. And directly in front of her, hat in his hands and eyes the color of a summer sky, stood the man who had been thrown. "That was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I have ever seen," he said, and his voice was warm like honey in tea, with an accent that spoke of Texas and long trails. Vivian felt her cheeks warm under the dust and sweat. The horse was frightened, not mean. It just needed help. Most folks could not tell the difference. He stepped closer, and Vivian noticed he was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly where it touched his collar. His face was weathered from sun and work, but his eyes were kind. "I am Reed Foster. I work the cattle ranch 3 miles south of here. Vivian Abbott." She realized she was still holding his horse's reins and handed them over, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. The new owner of the Ashford place. It was not a question. Of course everyone knew who she was. "I heard you arrived yesterday. News travels fast in Julian, it seems." Reed smiled, and it transformed his whole face. Small town, not much else to talk about except new arrivals and old gossips. He paused, examining his horse with the same careful attention Vivian had shown. "You know horses." "I used to." Vivian glanced back toward her abandoned wheelbarrow. "I should go. I have work to do." "Wait." Reed caught her arm gently, then immediately released it as if he had overstepped. "Let me thank you properly. That horse, Thunder, he is worth more to me than almost anything I own. You saved him from a bullet and likely saved someone from getting kicked. That deserves more than just words. I need no thanks for doing what was right." "There it is," Reed said, but his tone was not unkind. At her questioning look, he continued, "That pride everyone is talking about, though I cannot say I see it as a fault." Vivian stiffened. "You do not even know me." "No, but I would like to." He said it simply, directly, as if such statements were easy. Julian is not a bad town, Miss Abbott, but it is set in its ways. Folks here, they expect women to be a certain way, soft-spoken, grateful, eager to please. You are none of those things, and it scares them. I do not care what scares them. But even as she said it, Vivian felt the loneliness of the past months pressing against her ribs. She had not realized how much she wanted someone to understand, to see past the walls she had built, until this cowboy with his honest eyes offered something like comprehension. I know you do not. Reed gathered thunder's reins, his movements practiced and sure. But if you ever want a friend in this town, one who thinks saving a horse from a tangle is worth more than 100 false smiles, my ranch is south on the main road. The Foster Ranch. Anyone can point you there. He tipped his hat to her, swung up into the saddle with easy grace, and rode off before Vivian could formulate a response. She stood in the middle of the street, aware of the stares still fixed on her, and felt something shift in her chest, something that felt dangerous and hopeful all at once. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Vivian worked on her house from dawn until dusk, repairing shutters, fixing the leaking roof, painting walls that had gone gray with neglect. She bought chickens and planted a garden, determined to make the place self-sufficient. When she went into town for supplies, she faced the same cold shoulders, the same whispered judgments, but she held her head high and gave them nothing to complain about except her refusal to apologize for existing. She saw Reed twice in that first week, both times from a distance. Once he was loading supplies at the general store, and once he rode past her house, raising his hat in greeting. Each time, Vivian felt her heart do something complicated and unsettling, and each time she told herself firmly that she had not come to California to fall for a cowboy, no matter how kind his eyes or how warm his smile. But on the 8th day after her arrival, Reed came to her door. Vivian was covered in dirt, having spent the morning digging out the old well to see if it could be restored to use. Her hair had escaped its pins and hung in tangled waves around her face, and her split skirt was filthy. She looked like a disaster, and of course that was when Reed Foster decided to appear on her porch, hat in hand and that smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Miss Abbott," he said, as polite as if she were dressed for Sunday service. "Mr. Foster." Vivian resisted the urge to pat down her hair. "What brings you here?" "Well, I heard in town that you have been working yourself to the bone trying to fix this place up on your own, and I thought maybe you could use some help. I am managing fine." "I am sure you are." He peered past her into the house, his expression thoughtful. "But managing fine and having help are not mutually exclusive. I have got the afternoon free and I am pretty good with repairs, unless you would rather struggle alone out of principle." The words should have been offensive, but his tone was so gentle, so understanding that Vivian found herself laughing instead. It startled her, that sound, rusty from disuse. "You think I am being stubborn." "I think you are being careful," Reed corrected. "There is a difference. You do not know who to trust yet, and that is wise. But Miss Abbott, I promise you, I am just a man offering to help fix a porch rail and maybe patch a roof. Nothing more, nothing less." Vivian studied him, this cowboy who had appeared in her life like something out of a story. She thought about the lonely dinners she had eaten at the small kitchen table, the evenings when the silence of the house pressed in on her. She thought about how tired her hands were, how her back ached, how it would be nice, just once, to not have to do everything alone. "The well needs clearing," she heard herself say, "and the barn door is hanging crooked." Reed's smile was like sunrise. "Well then, we had better get started." He worked beside her for the rest of that afternoon, and Vivian discovered that Reed Foster was as good as his word. He cleared the well with patient efficiency, fixed the barn door with skill, and even repaired 3 fence posts that Vivian had not gotten around to mentioning. He worked in comfortable silence, speaking only when necessary, and never once made her feel inadequate or helpless. When the sun began to set, Vivian found herself inviting him in for water and a bit of bread she had baked that morning. They sat at her kitchen table, and for the first time since arriving in Julian, Vivian felt at ease in someone else's company. "Why are you being kind to me?" she asked suddenly, surprising herself with the bluntness of the question. Reed looked up from his bread, considering. "Because you deserve kindness, and because I see you, Miss Abbott, really see you, not the story everyone else has made up." "What do you see?" "I see a woman who has been hurt and who will not let herself be hurt again. I see someone who would rather be thought proud than pitiable. I see strength and intelligence and a heart that is still good despite whatever made you build those walls so high." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "And I see someone who saved my horse because it was the right thing to do, even when this whole town was watching and waiting for you to fail." Vivian felt something crack in her chest, a fissure in the armor she had worn for so long. "You see too much, maybe. Or maybe I see just enough." Reed stood, reaching for his hat. "I should head back before it gets full dark. But Miss Abbott, Vivian, if I may call you that, I want you to know that you have got a friend in me, whether you want one or not." After he left, Vivian sat at her table as the shadows lengthened, one hand pressed to her chest where her heart was beating too fast. She tried to tell herself it was just gratitude, just relief at finding an ally in this hostile place. But she knew, even then, that it was more. Reed Foster had looked at her like she was something precious, something worth knowing, and it had been so long since anyone had looked at her that way. The weeks passed, and Reed became a regular presence at the Ashford house. He came by 3 or 4 times a week, always with some excuse, help with this repair, advice on that problem, but Vivian knew and he knew that the excuses were just that. They were becoming friends and more. They were becoming something neither of them wanted to name yet. They talked as they worked, and Vivian found herself telling Reed about Boston, about her father's decline and her mother's death, about the shame and the poverty and the pride that had kept her standing through it all. Reed listened without judgment, without pity, just acceptance. In return, he told her about growing up in Texas, about learning the cattle business from his father, about coming to California 5 years ago to start fresh after his father passed. He had built the Foster Ranch from nearly nothing, working as a hand for other ranchers while saving every penny to buy his own land, his own herd. He knew what it was to struggle, to fight for every inch of ground, and Vivian found in him a kindred spirit, but the town still talked. If anything, their gossip grew worse as Reed's visits continued. Vivian heard the whispers at church, the speculation at the general store. She is using him. She has got her claws in poor Reed Foster. Too proud to work but not too proud to take advantage of a kind man. It hurt more than Vivian wanted to admit, especially because she worried there was truth in it. What if Reed was just being kind and she was reading too much into his smiles, his lingering glances, the way his hand sometimes brushed hers as they worked side by side? One evening, as they sat on her newly repaired porch watching the sunset paint the hills purple and gold, Vivian voiced her fears. "You should stop coming here," she said abruptly. Reed, who had been whittling a small piece of wood, looked up in surprise. "Why would I do that?" "Because the town is talking. They think I am taking advantage of you. Do you care what they think?" "No, yes, I do not know." Vivian wrapped her arms around herself, though the evening was warm. "Reed, you have been nothing but kind to me, but I worry that your reputation is suffering because of me. People respect you here. You have built something good. I do not want to ruin that." Reed set down his knife and the wood, turning to face her fully. "Vivian, I am 27 years old. I have been working since I was tall enough to reach a horse's stirrup. I have built my ranch with my own hands, my own sweat, my own choices. Do you really think I would let town gossip dictate who I spend my time with? But they talk. Let them talk. I stopped living my life for other people's opinions a long time ago." He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle on hers. "I come here because I want to. Because spending time with you is the best part of my day. Because when I am with you, I feel like I can be myself, not the person everyone expects me to be." Vivian's breath caught. "Reed, I am not finished." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, sending shivers up her arm. "Vivian, this town thinks you are too proud. They see the way you hold yourself apart, and they think it is arrogance. But I know better. I know that pride is the shield you use to protect a heart that has been broken too many times, and I want you to know that you do not need that shield with me. You can just be yourself, whatever that looks like, and it will be enough. You will be enough." Tears prickled at Vivian's eyes, hot and unexpected. She had not cried when her father died, had not cried when her mother followed him, had not cried through the endless humiliations of poverty and loss. But Reed's words, spoken with such simple sincerity, broke something open inside her. "I do not know how to do this," she whispered. "I do not know how to let someone in. Then we will learn together." Reed squeezed her hand. "Vivian, I am not asking for anything you are not ready to give. I just want you to know that I am here, that I see you, all of you, and I am not going anywhere." That night, after Reed had ridden home, Vivian lay in her bed and stared at the ceiling, her hand still tingling where he had held it. She was falling in love with Reed Foster, she realized. Perhaps she had been falling since the moment she handed him his horse's reins and saw the kindness in his eyes. It terrified her. Love meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant the possibility of pain. She had sworn she would never let herself be hurt again. But oh, the way he looked at her. The way he listened. The way he saw past her walls to the woman beneath. It made her want to take the risk. The next Sunday, Vivian walked into church and found Reed waiting by the door. He offered her his arm, and she took it, feeling the weight of every stare as they walked down the aisle together. Reed led her to his regular pew, and they sat side by side as Reverend Matthews began the service. The whispers were a constant buzz, like angry bees, but with Reed beside her, steady and sure, Vivian found she could ignore them. After the service, as they filed out, several women turned their backs pointedly. One man even muttered something under his breath about upstart Easterners. "Ignore them," Reed said quietly, his hand at the small of her back. But someone was not content to let it go. Martha Grimes, the general store owner, blocked their path, her face pinched with disapproval. "Reed Foster, I am disappointed in you," Martha announced loudly enough for everyone in earshot to hear. "Taking up with this woman who is clearly above her station. Does she even know what it means to be a rancher's wife? Or is she just playing at country life until something better comes along?" Vivian felt her face flame, but before she could respond, Reed stepped forward, his expression harder than Vivian had ever seen it. "Mrs. Grimes, you do not know what you are talking about. I know what I see. I see a girl too proud to make friends, too fancy for honest work, and too calculating to turn down a kind-hearted fool when he offers help. That is enough." Reed's voice cut like steel. "Miss Abbott has worked harder in the month she has been here than most people work in a year. She has restored that house nearly single-handedly, and she did it without complaint or asking for charity. The only thing she is guilty of is refusing to bow and scrape for approval from people who decided to hate her before they even met her." "Reed," Vivian murmured, touching his arm. "It is all right. No, it is not all right. He looked around at the gathered crowd, his jaw set. I am saying this once so everyone can hear. Miss Abbott is a good, honest, hard-working woman. She deserves respect, and if this town cannot give her that, then maybe this town is not as Christian as it pretends to be every Sunday. The silence that followed was absolute. Martha Grimes looked like she had been slapped, and several other townspeople had the grace to appear ashamed. Reed offered Vivian his arm again, and they walked together to where Thunder was tied, heads high despite the shock and whispers following them. You did not have to do that, Vivian said when they were out of earshot. Yes, I did. Reed helped her up onto Thunder, then swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to hold the reins. It was improper, scandalous even, but Vivian found she did not care. She leaned back against his chest and felt his heartbeat steady against her spine. They rode back to her house in silence, but it was a comfortable silence filled with understanding. When they arrived, Reed helped her down, his hands lingering on her waist. Reed, I need to tell you something, Vivian said, her courage gathered like a fragile flame. I am afraid. Of what? Of this. Of us. Of letting myself care about you and then losing you. I have lost so much already. I do not know if I can survive losing anything else. Reed cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones with infinite tenderness. Vivian, I cannot promise you that life will not be hard sometimes. I cannot promise that we will not face difficulties, because Lord knows this town is going to make things challenging for a while. But I can promise you this, I will not leave. I will not turn my back on you. Whatever happens, we will face it together. How can you be so sure? Because I love you. He said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I have loved you since you walked straight up to a terrified horse without a trace of fear. Since you showed this whole town that strength and pride are not the same as arrogance. Since the first time you laughed and I realized I would do anything to hear that sound again. Vivian felt tears spill over, running hot down her cheeks. I love you too. I did not want to. I tried not to. But I do. Reed smiled, that beautiful smile that transformed his whole face, and then he was kissing her. His lips were warm and gentle, asking rather than demanding, and Vivian kissed him back with all the feeling she had kept locked away for so long. It was her first kiss, and it tasted like hope and sunlight and the promise of something good finally coming into her life. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Reed rested his forehead against hers. Marry me. What? Marry me, Vivian. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other 6 weeks, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to build a life with you, here in these hills. I want everyone in that town to know that you are mine and I am yours, and they can take their opinions and judgments and keep them to themselves. Vivian laughed, a sound of pure joy. That is possibly the worst proposal I have ever heard. Is that a no? It is a yes, you ridiculous man. Yes, I will marry you. Reed let out a whoop that probably echoed all the way down to town, swept her into his arms and spun her around until she was dizzy and laughing and happier than she had been in years. When he set her down, he kissed her again, deeper this time, and Vivian felt the last of her walls crumble into dust. They were married 3 weeks later in the little church in Julian, with Reverend Matthews officiating and the whole town watching in varying degrees of shock and disapproval. Vivian wore a simple white dress she had sewn herself, and Reed wore his best suit, which was still dusty from the trail because he had ridden straight from moving cattle to make it to the ceremony on time. Not everyone approved. Martha Grimes and her followers stayed away, making their displeasure known. But a surprising number of townspeople did attend, including Sheriff Coleman, who stood up as Reed's witness, and an older woman named Dorothy Kent, who approached Vivian after the ceremony with tears in her eyes. "My dear," Dorothy said, taking Vivian's hands, "I owe you an apology. We all do. We judged you without knowing you, and that was wrong. But watching you these past weeks, seeing how hard you have worked and how happy you have made Reed, well, some of us are starting to understand that maybe we were wrong about you." "Thank you," Vivian said, genuinely moved. "That means a great deal." "Give us time," Dorothy said. "This town is slow to change, but it does change eventually. You will see." The reception was held at the Foster Ranch, which was now also Vivian's home. Reed had spent the past week preparing, cleaning the house that had been a bachelor's domain and making room for his wife. It was a good house, sturdy and well built, with a view of the rolling hills and the apple orchards that dotted the valley. As the sun set on their wedding day, Reed and Vivian stood on the porch of their home, watching their few guests depart. Reed wrapped his arms around Vivian from behind, and she leaned into his warmth, feeling safe and loved and home. "Are you happy?" he murmured against her hair. "I am," and she meant it. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Vivian was genuinely, completely happy. That night, in the room that was now theirs, Reed made love to his wife with patience and tenderness, showing her with his body what his words had already told her, that she was cherished, that she was precious, that she was loved beyond measure. The first year of their marriage was not easy. The town remained divided on the subject of Vivian Foster. Some people, like Dorothy Kent, warmed to her gradually, won over by her tireless work ethic and her obvious devotion to Reed. Others, like Martha Grimes, held onto their prejudices with stubborn determination. But Vivian found that with Reed by her side, she could face anything. They worked the ranch together, rising before dawn to tend the cattle, mend fences, manage the endless tasks that came with running a successful operation. Vivian proved herself as capable as any ranch hand, learning to ride the range, to cut cattle from the herd, to work with the skilled efficiency that came from necessity and determination. Reed watched his wife transform from a proud Eastern lady to a true Western woman, and he fell more in love with her every day. She never lost her spine or her dignity, but she softened in other ways, learning to laugh more easily, to accept help when it was offered, to let people in. The breakthrough with the town came unexpectedly, 8 months into their marriage. A late spring storm hit Julian hard, bringing floods that threatened homes and livelihoods. The creek that ran through town swelled into a raging torrent, and several families found themselves trapped by rising water. Vivian and Reed rode into town as soon as they heard, bringing rope and horses and determination. While others stood wringing their hands, Vivian plunged into the chaos, organizing rescue efforts with the same calm efficiency she had shown with Reed's frightened horse all those months ago. She directed men to shore up sandbag barriers, coordinated the evacuation of families from threatened homes, and even waded into waist-deep water herself to help an elderly man to safety. Reed worked beside her, his heart in his throat every time she put herself in danger, but proud beyond words of her courage. When it was over, when the waters had receded and everyone was safe, the town looked at Vivian Foster with new eyes. Martha Grimes herself approached, her face red with shame and something that might have been respect. "Mrs. Foster," she said stiffly, "I was wrong about you. I see that now." Vivian, exhausted and soaking wet, simply nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Grimes." After that day, the whispers changed. People no longer muttered about pride and pretension. Instead, they spoke of the time Vivian Foster had risked her own safety to help save Julian from the flood. Shopkeepers greeted her warmly. Women invited her to their quilting circles. The town had finally seen past their first impressions to the woman underneath. But Vivian found that the acceptance, while nice, mattered less than she had thought it would. She had Raid, she had their ranch, she had the life they were building together. The town's opinion was just icing on a cake that was already sweet. 2 years into their marriage, Vivian discovered she was pregnant. She told Reed one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, the same porch where he had first told her he loved her. "Reed, I have something to tell you." He looked at her, and something in her expression made him set down the tack he had been repairing. "What is it?" "I am going to have a baby." For a moment, Reed just stared at her, his face blank with shock. Then joy spread across his features like sunrise, and he let out a shout that probably startled the horses in the barn. He pulled Vivian into his arms, holding her like she was made of glass and gold. "A baby," he breathed. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" "Happy." "Vivian, I am the happiest man alive." Their son was born on a clear October morning in 1881, delivered with the help of Dorothy Kent, who had become something of a surrogate mother to Vivian. Reed paced outside the bedroom, wearing a path in the floorboards, until Dorothy finally called him in to meet his child. Vivian lay in their bed, exhausted and glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. Reed approached slowly, almost reverently, and when Vivian pulled back the blanket to show him their son's small, perfect face, he felt tears slip down his cheeks. "He is beautiful," Reed whispered. "You are beautiful. Thank you for this." They named him Daniel, after Reed's father, and he became the center of their world. Vivian discovered depths of love she had not known existed, a fierce protectiveness and tender joy that made her previous life seem like a pale shadow. Reed was a devoted father, carrying Daniel in a sling as he did chores, singing to him in the evenings, teaching him about horses and cattle as soon as the boy could understand. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. Daniel learned to walk, then to ride, then to help with the ranch work, his bright questions and eager enthusiasm bringing laughter to every day. When Daniel was 3, Vivian had their second child, a daughter they named Margaret after Vivian's mother. 2 years after that came another son, Joseph. The Foster Ranch prospered under Reed's careful management and Vivian's sharp business sense. They expanded their herd, bought adjacent land, became one of the most successful operations in the region. But success never changed them. Reed remained the kind, honest man who had seen past Vivian's defenses to the woman beneath. Vivian stayed strong and determined, though now her strength was tempered with warmth and openness. The town of Julian grew to love the Fosters. Reed was respected as a fair businessman and a good neighbor, always ready to help when someone needed it. Vivian became known for her generosity, organizing charity drives and helping struggling families. The woman the town had once dismissed as too proud became a pillar of the community. But the best moments were still the quiet ones, the evenings when Reed and Vivian sat on their porch after the children were asleep, watching the stars come out over the California hills. They would hold hands and talk about their day, their dreams, their children's futures. Sometimes they would kiss, still as passionate as they had been on their wedding night, and sometimes they would just sit in comfortable silence, two people who had found in each other everything they had been searching for. One evening, when they had been married 15 years, Vivian turned to Reed with a thoughtful expression. "You remember the day we met?" she asked. "Every detail. You walked up to a terrified horse like you were approaching a dance partner, all calm and grace. I was so angry that day. Angry at the town for judging me. Angry at life for being so hard. Angry at myself for caring what anyone thought." Reed squeezed her hand. And now I understand that pride was just fear wearing a different face. I was so afraid of being hurt again that I would not let anyone close enough to try. She turned to look at him, her eyes shining in the twilight. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for seeing who I really was, even when I was trying so hard to hide it. You were never hiding, love. Not from me. Reed brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. From the first moment I saw you, you were perfect. The town thought you were too proud, but I thought you were perfect, and I was right. Vivian laughed, the sound still as joyful as it had been on the day he first made her laugh. I was far from perfect. No one is perfect, but you were perfect for me. You are perfect for me. You will always be perfect for me. As if to punctuate his words, a childish voice called from inside the house. Papa, Mama, Margaret took my book. I did not. He is lying. Reed and Vivian exchanged amused glances and rose to go mediate whatever crisis had erupted in the house. But before they went inside, Reed caught Vivian in his arms and kissed her, long and deep and full of all the love that 15 years together had only deepened. I love you, Vivian Foster, he said against her lips. I love you, Reed Foster, she replied. Now and always. They went inside together, hand in hand, to the life and family they had built through love and faith and the courage to believe in second chances. The years continued to roll forward like the seasons, each bringing its own joys and challenges. Daniel grew into a strong, capable young man who inherited his father's skill with horses and his mother's sharp mind. At 18, he started working the ranch full-time, talking about someday taking over the operation when Reed decided to slow down. Margaret, at 15, had her mother's beauty and her father's warm heart. She spent her days helping Vivian with the house and the growing charitable work Vivian had become known for in Julian. But Margaret also loved to ride, often accompanying her father and brother when they worked the range. Joseph, the youngest at 13, was still finding his place, showing talent with numbers that made Vivian think he might be destined for something beyond ranch work. Perhaps law or business in Sacramento or San Francisco. Reed supported whatever path his children chose, having learned from his own life that happiness came from following your heart, not expectations. The foster home was always full of noise and life and love. Friends came and went. Ranch hands joined them for meals. On Sundays, they hosted gatherings that had become a Julian tradition, with neighbors bringing food and stories to share on the wide porch that had seen so much of Reed and Vivian's love story unfold. One particular Sunday in the summer of 1896, as Vivian watched her children laughing with friends and Reed telling stories to a group of enthralled youngsters, Dorothy Kent came to stand beside her. You have built a beautiful life, Dorothy said, her voice warm with affection. The old woman was in her 70s now, moving slower but still sharp as ever. We have been blessed, Vivian agreed. The town was wrong about you, you know. We were so wrong. Dorothy shook her head. I still remember that first day you arrived, stepping off that stage coach like a queen surveying a kingdom. We thought you were judging us, but really, we were the ones doing the judging. It was a long time ago, Dorothy. Maybe so, but I want you to know something. Dorothy took Vivian's hand, her grip still surprisingly strong. You taught this town a valuable lesson. You taught us that strength is not arrogance, that pride is not a sin when it is born from dignity, and that sometimes the best things in life come wrapped in packages we did not expect. Vivian felt tears prick her eyes. That is a kind thing to say. It is a true thing to say. You and Reed, you are what love should be. Equal partners, best friends, devoted to each other and to the family you have built. Julian is better for having you in it. That evening, after the guests had departed and the children had gone to their rooms, Reed found Vivian standing at their bedroom window, looking out over the land that had become home. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on top of her head. "I am thinking about how different my life is from what I imagined it would be." "Better or worse?" Vivian turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had changed everything. His hair was touched with gray now, his face more lined from years of work and sun, but his eyes still held that same kindness and warmth that had captured her heart 18 years ago. "Better," she said softly. "So much better. When I came to Julian, I thought I was coming to an ending. My life in Boston was over, my family was gone, I had nothing left but a house from an uncle I barely remembered. I thought Julian would just be a place to exist, to survive. And instead I found you. I found love. I found a home, a family, a purpose. I found myself." She reached up to cup his face, her thumb tracing the familiar lines of his features. "Reed, I was so broken when I arrived here. I did not even realize how broken until you started putting me back together. You were never broken, love, just hurt. There is a difference. Either way, you healed me. You and our life together. Every day with you has been a gift." Reed kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips, with the tenderness of long practice and deep love. "The gift was mine, Vivian. The scared cowboy who found a woman brave enough to face down a terrified horse, and later brave enough to face down a whole town that did not understand her. You made me better. You made everything better." They stood together in the moonlight streaming through their window, holding each other close, and Vivian thought about the strange path that had led her to this moment. All the pain and loss and struggle had brought her here, to this man, to this life, to this perfect moment of contentment. The next years brought their own changes. Daniel fell in love with a rancher's daughter from the next town over, a smart, practical girl named Sarah who fit seamlessly into the Foster family. Their wedding was a grand affair, with half the county in attendance, and when Sarah had their first grandchild 2 years later, Reed and Vivian discovered the unique joy of being grandparents. Margaret eventually married a young lawyer from San Diego, a kind man who supported her charitable work and made her laugh. They settled in Julian, building a house near the Foster ranch, and Margaret continued to be a vital part of her parents' lives. Joseph, as Vivian had suspected, did not follow the ranching path. He went to university in San Francisco, studying business and law, but he came home often, and his education proved invaluable in helping the family navigate the changing times as California modernized. Through it all, Reed and Vivian remained the center of the family, the sun around which everyone else orbited. They aged gracefully together, their love deepening with each passing year. Reed still looked at Vivian like she hung the moon, and Vivian still felt her heart skip when Reed walked into a room. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the whole town of Julian came together to celebrate. The party was held at the Foster Ranch, with tables laden with food and music echoing through the hills. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Sheriff Coleman, now retired and graying, stood to make a speech. 25 years ago, he said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd, a young woman stepped off a stagecoach in our town. We did not know what to make of her. She was different from us, and we let that difference make us unkind. We judged her before we knew her, and we were wrong. Vivian Foster has given more to this town than we ever deserved. She has been a friend, a leader, a beacon of what it means to live with integrity and grace. And Reed Foster, well, Reed was smart enough to see what the rest of us missed. He saw not pride but strength, not arrogance but dignity. He saw a woman worth loving, and he loved her well. Here is to 25 more years of the Fosters showing us all what marriage should be." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Reed pulled Vivian close and kissed her in front of everyone, to much whooping and laughter. Later, when the party had finally ended and they were alone, they walked together through the orchards behind their house, hands intertwined. 25 years, Vivian mused. It feels like both forever and no time at all. I know what you mean. Sometimes I still feel like that cowboy who fell off his horse and got rescued by the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Vivian laughed. I believe I rescued your horse, not you. You rescued both of us. That horse and his foolish owner who did not know he was looking for love until it smacked him in the face. They stopped beneath an old apple tree, its branches heavy with fruit. Reed cupped Vivian's face in his hands, his touch still sending shivers through her after all these years. Vivian Abbott Foster, you are still the most beautiful, most maddening, most perfect woman I have ever known. I loved you when you were 22 and too proud to admit you needed help. I love you now at 47 with our children grown and grandchildren on the way. And I will love you when we are old and gray and sitting on that porch in rocking chairs, still holding hands and watching sunsets. Promise, Vivian whispered, her eyes shining with tears. Promise, until my last breath and beyond. They kissed beneath the apple tree, two people who had found in each other everything worth having. The moon rose over the California hills, painting everything silver and peaceful, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called out into the night. The years continued their steady march. Reed and Vivian aged together, their children thrived, and their grandchildren filled their lives with joy and chaos in equal measure. The ranch remained successful, now run primarily by Daniel with input from Reed, who had finally agreed to slow down a bit after a health scare in his 60s. But even as their pace slowed, the love between Reed and Vivian never dimmed. They still took walks together every evening when weather permitted. They still sat on their porch holding hands. They still looked at each other with eyes full of wonder that they had been lucky enough to find each other. Julian itself had changed over the decades. The little gold rush town had transformed into a thriving agricultural community, known for its apples and its scenic beauty. New people came and went, but the Fosters remained, a constant presence and a reminder of what steadfast love looked like. On a crisp autumn morning in 1908, as the leaves turned gold and the air smelled of apple harvests, Reed and Vivian celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. It was a smaller celebration this time, just family and close friends, held in the home that had sheltered their love for 3 decades. Daniel stood to make a toast, his own children gathered around him. "To my parents," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "who taught me that love is not just a feeling but a choice you make every day. Who showed me that strength and gentleness are not opposites but partners. Who built a life and a family on a foundation of respect, trust, and devotion. Everything I know about being a husband, a father, a man, I learned from watching you too. Thank you." Margaret added her own words, speaking of how her mother's courage had inspired her to pursue her own dreams, how her father's kindness had shown her what to look for in a partner. Joseph talked about the values they had instilled, the example they had set, the love they had given so freely. When it was finally just the two of them again, Reed and Vivian sat in their familiar spot on the porch. Reed's hair was white now, his movements slower, but his eyes still sparkled when he looked at his wife. Vivian's beauty had matured into something even more striking, her face lined with years of laughter and love. "You ever think about that first day?" Reed asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "When I fell off Thunder and you marched up like some avenging angel to save him?" "Often," Vivian admitted. I think about how close I came to never knowing you. If I had stayed back with everyone else, if I had been too afraid or too careful, if the reins had not tangled just that way. Fate, Reed said firmly. It was always fate. We were always meant to find each other. You really believe that, with everything in me? Vivian, in all my life, the smartest thing I ever did was see past what everyone else saw. They saw pride and I saw strength. They saw arrogance and I saw self-protection. They saw a woman who did not need anyone, and I saw a woman who desperately needed someone to need her back. You are making me cry, Vivian said, wiping at her eyes. Good tears, I hope. The best tears. She leaned her head on his shoulder, fitting into the space that seemed made for her. Reed Foster, loving you has been the great adventure of my life. Every day with you has been a gift I never expected to receive. Then we have both been blessed beyond measure. They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of rose and amber and gold. 3 decades of memories lived in the space between them, woven through with laughter and tears, struggles and triumphs, and above all, love. The kind of love that grows stronger with time, that weathers storms and celebrates sunshine, that knows the worst and loves anyway. As the stars began to appear, their grandchildren came running out, full of questions and energy and the innocent assumption that their grandparents would always be there, steady and constant as the mountains. Reed and Vivian answered their questions, told them stories, gave them hugs and cookies and the security of being deeply loved. Later that night, in the bed they had shared for 30 years, Reed held Vivian close and thought about the life they had built. It had not always been easy. There had been droughts and financial struggles, illnesses and worries, all the normal trials of a life fully lived. But through it all, they had faced everything together, 2 people who had chosen each other and kept choosing each other every day since. I love you, Reed whispered into the darkness. I love you too, Vivian whispered back, always and forever. The years that followed were gentler, slower, but no less full of love. Reed and Vivian grew old together with grace and gratitude, surrounded by family and friends, secure in the knowledge that they had lived well and loved deeply. When Reed passed away in the spring of 1915, at the age of 74, it was peacefully in his sleep with Vivian's hand in his. She sat with him for a long time after, memorizing his face, thanking him for 37 years of unwavering love and devotion. The grief was profound, a physical ache that settled in her bones. But Vivian did not fall apart. Reed had taught her too well about strength and resilience. She mourned him deeply, honestly, but she also celebrated him, sharing stories about his kindness and humor with their children and grandchildren, ensuring that his memory would live on. She lived 2 more years, staying on the ranch that had been their shared dream, watching her family grow and thrive. She remained active in the community, continuing the charitable work that had become her passion. And every evening, she sat on their porch, imagining Reed beside her, and watched the sunset paint the California hills in gold. Vivian Foster died in the autumn of 1917, quietly in the night, and the town of Julian mourned her passing with genuine grief. The church was packed for her funeral, filled with people whose lives she had touched, whose prejudices she had challenged, whose hearts she had changed simply by being herself. They buried her next to Reed on a hillside overlooking the ranch, beneath an old oak tree. The simple headstone read, Vivian Abbott Foster, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, friend. She was perfect. Years later, when the grandchildren told stories to their own children, they spoke of their grandparents with reverence and love. They told of how Vivian had arrived in Julian proud and alone, how Reed had seen past the walls she had built, how their love had transformed not just their own lives but an entire town's understanding of what it meant to be strong, to be proud, to be worthy of love. The story became legend in Julian, the tale of the Eastern woman who was too proud and the cowboy who thought she was perfect. Young couples starting out would visit their graves, hoping to find a love as deep and true. The Foster Ranch remained in the family for generations, a testament to what two people could build when they worked together in love and partnership. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind whispered through the hills, people swore they could see two figures sitting on the old porch, hands intertwined, watching the sunset together just as they always had. Whether it was ghost or memory or wishful thinking, no one could say. But it brought comfort to know that a love like theirs did not simply end with death but lived on, eternal and unbreakable, a beacon for all who came after. The town had thought she was too proud. The cowboy had thought she was perfect. In the end, they had both been right. Vivian's pride had been the armor that protected a heart capable of deep and lasting love. And to Reed, she had been perfect, not in spite of her flaws but because of them, because she was real and honest and brave enough to let him love her. Their story became a reminder that sometimes the things that make us hardest to love are the very things that make us most worth loving. That real strength is not the absence of fear, but the courage to be vulnerable anyway. That pride and humility can coexist when pride means self-respect, and humility means openness to love. And most of all, that love, true love, sees not what we show the world but who we really are underneath. Reed had looked at Vivian and seen past the defenses to the woman who needed to be seen, to be known, to be loved without condition or judgment. And Vivian had looked at Reed and found the home she had been searching for all along, not in a place but in a person. Their love story, born in the dust and heat of a California summer, nurtured through years of partnership and devotion, stood as proof that the best things in life often come when we least expect them. That sometimes we have to travel far from where we started to find where we belong. That home is not where you come from, but where you are loved for exactly who you are. The legacy of Reed and Vivian Foster lived on through their descendants, through the town they had helped shape, through the countless lives they had touched with their kindness and example. But perhaps their greatest legacy was simply this, that they had loved each other wholly and completely, that they had built a life together based on mutual respect and genuine partnership, and that they had shown everyone around them what marriage could be when two people truly saw each other and chose each other, day after day after day. In the end, that was the real story. Not about pride or perfection, but about two imperfect people who found in each other the courage to be themselves, the strength to face whatever came, and the love to make it all worthwhile. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and left the world better than they found it. What more could anyone ask of a life well lived? And so the story closes, not with an ending but with a legacy. The Foster Ranch still stands in the hills above Julian, California, now run by the great-great-grandchildren of Reed and Vivian. On the old porch, worn smooth by generations of use, young couples still sit and dream of the future. And sometimes, when the light is just right and the wind carries the scent of apple blossoms, you can almost feel the presence of the couple who started it all, still holding hands, still watching sunsets, still perfectly, completely, eternally in love.